We were all migrants once, and we'll all be migrants again. Today's empires are tomorrow's refugees. And if we allow ourselves to go down that route of blaming everything on migrants and looking to get our numbers down, there's no way back.
You often talk about accountability, but the people waging these wars don't.
The international community, will they stand up and hold people to account, or will they just mouth the empty platitudes?
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. In a world where conflict and crisis are commonplace and where the gap between humanitarian need and global response is widening, the role of the United Nations top relief official is more consequential than ever. From sprawling displacement and growing hunger in Sudan to escalating danger in the Middle East and efforts to pivot towards recovery in Syria, the challenges are profound. Tom Fletcher, the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator at the United Nations, is tasked with coordinating life-saving assistance to tens of millions of people battling against underfunding, calling for protection for civilians and aid workers, and wrestling with the political and logistical barriers that define today's humanitarian landscape. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Krishnan.
I wanted to begin with Lebanon, partly because you've been there recently. You were, of course, the ambassador for the British government, so you know it very well. And the situation there is very acute, with, even in the ceasefire, destruction still taking place, the extent of the destruction and the refugee situation vast. How big is the challenge for you there?
Massive. And you're right that destruction is still going on now, even after the ceasefire, but it has receded dramatically. We've been trying to get back south of the Litani over the weekend. We've had a couple of convoys get to displace people down there. But look, right now, 1 in 5 people in Lebanon is displaced. As I crossed into Damascus a few weeks ago, that week, 200,000 Lebanese people had crossed into Syria. And so the needs are huge. We launched a flash appeal about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we're only about a quarter funded. Destruction, displacement, and you've got populations going back now to see if it's safe to go back, and it's not.
So what about the way that war has been conducted? Because in many ways, Israel seemed to be doing in Lebanon what it had done, or learning from what it had done in Gaza.
Well, that's a big concern, is when you hear that same rhetoric being used about flattening places, about bombing people back to the Stone Age, about reducing Lebanon to rubble. And literally, Israeli ministers saying, we'll do to you what we did to Gaza. Now, I've been to Gaza twice in the last year and a bit, and I know what that means. And so it's chilling to hear it. But it's part of this wider context of impunity and lawlessness in the world, where you've got some of the most powerful people in the world, the most powerful person in the world, threatening countries, threatening to wipe out civilizations. And we're asking everyone, imploring everyone really, to get back to, it's not sexy, but international humanitarian law. And respecting the rules and conventions and principles, respecting the fact that even wars have rules.
Israel always says it does respect international law. Does it?
Well, I think a lot of the actions we've seen in both Gaza and Lebanon would not be lawful. And that is ultimately a matter for the courts, the ICC, the ICJ. It needs to be proven. It's not just for me to come along and chuck allegations like that around, but we're seeing all the time the effect of the action. Look at the attacks on humanitarian workers, for example. In the last 3 years, we've lost 1,000 colleagues globally, and over half of those were in Gaza. Look at the attacks on health workers. And I met many health workers in southern Beirut who'd been working in southern Lebanon. A massive number of people in well-marked ambulances, for example, who have been hit by strikes. And so this context of impunity and lawlessness is really chilling right now. We're up against it everywhere we work.
What did you make of the incident that happened recently in Lebanon, where the ambulance workers were apparently deliberately targeted at least 3 times, where different waves of ambulance corps went to help each other and each one was hit? Now Israel again says ambulances are used to transport Hezbollah weapons. They don't provide evidence for it, but that's what they say. And does that ever become a justification for that kind of attack on ambulance workers?
So there is no justification for hitting ambulances and health workers. These are, basic laws that we came up with, after the Second World War. Developed before, but through the Geneva Conventions, when we'd seen, the danger of a lawless world. And so, no, you should, ambulance workers, health workers should never be a target. And it is, it's really disturbing. We know about from elsewhere, the double tap, the famous double tap where rescuers are hit. It was a tactic of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, for example. But now this new lexicon of talking about a treble tap or a quadruple tap, this is part of the context that my colleagues are working in all the time. And we're saying there needs to be accountability for those who are attacking us, wherever it is and whoever they are.
Right, but I mean, you often talk about accountability and the media talks about international law, but the people waging these wars don't, really. I mean, are these now increasingly meaningless phrases, given the way none of it is enforced?
So they mean a lot to us because they are our only protection. And ultimately, my colleagues are still going out there risking their lives. We lost more colleagues even over the weekend, UNICEF colleagues in Gaza. So our only protection is international law. The ambulance roofs aren't strong enough to protect us. The kit we wear isn't strong enough. But that protection is only as strong as the member states, the international community. Will they stand up and hold people to account for what they're doing, or will they just mouth the empty platitudes? If it's the latter, then these protections are meaningless now.
Because, I mean, isn't it for the Security Council to actually take meaningful decisions, which it doesn't appear to be doing?
Absolutely. I mean, what can I do? What can the UN leadership do other than point out what's happening and to call for that protection? I briefed the Security Council 2 weeks ago on the fact that we'd lost 1,000 colleagues in 3 years, that last year was the deadliest year to be a humanitarian in living memory, which is really quite something. This year in Sudan, 50% more child deaths than in the first quarter last year. So these conflicts are getting worse. Drone attacks, 700 people killed in Sudan in the first quarter of the year by drones. So it's getting more dangerous for civilians, more dangerous for humanitarians. But my challenge to them was, I don't want empty expressions, lofty phrases. We need full accountability. Call out the people doing this to us, stop arming them, and make sure they can't continue.
I want to talk about Sudan specifically, but before we get to that, I just wanted to talk about the impact of this war in Iran on those forgotten conflicts. Because the economic impact, which we're all analysing here at the petrol pumps, has a sort of a multiplier effect in the poorest countries in the world, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So you've got waves, like ripples of this. So you've got the situation in Iran itself, over 2,000 dead. And we're scaling up the response, particularly around healthcare, sanitation. We've got teams in there now assessing the damage. You've got the impact on places like Lebanon. We've touched on that. And I was there a couple of weeks ago. You've got the impact on Gaza and the Palestinian territories, where basically more crossings were shut. We only had one crossing open for the last few weeks. So it was even harder for us to continue that scale up we've been doing for 6 months. 1.5 million hot meals a day. The progress we've made was impaired. But then you've got that knock-on effect. You think about the fuel costs going up 20%, the food costs going up 20%, fertilizer costs, natural gas costs with the planting season coming, and all that traffic that was coming through the Straits of Hormuz, going to sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Africa. The effect of that blockage will be that more people slip below that line, will slip into poverty, and so we'll have that our needs that we deal with, already over 300 million people globally, will go up. And then you have another ring, another ripple coming out of that the further corrosion of international law, of the way that we talk about war, that sense of impunity, and the further erosion of basic generosity in the world. I was at an aid conference last week, a pledging conference, and a key donor said, we will carry on giving you this money right now, but please don't tell anyone. Please keep it quiet, because people at home won't like the fact that we're supporting the world's poorest, that we're saving lives when people at home are suffering more because of this energy crisis.
And how often is the donation coming with strings attached?
So I'm afraid, for us, we have to be principled in how we spend the money always. And that's our kind of gold standard. I'm afraid that our donors are all quite transactional. So you'll sit with donors and they'll say, okay, we're going to give you this money, but we need these 2 or 3 jobs. Or we're going to give you this money, but you must spend it in the following countries. You must spend it in Ukraine, because Ukraine matters to us more than the Central African Republic. So there's
So it's
always
never
that
unrestricted funding.
It's very rarely. We've got some great donors. I'd single out the Dutch, the Norwegians in particular. Others will now be upset. I haven't mentioned them, but who are the kind of gold standard for unearmarked multi-year funding. But across most of our donors, there's always that back and forth. A lot of donors
so governments are actually asking for jobs in the UN in return for donations.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's corrupt.
But that's not new. And our job is to ignore it. It's corrupt if we
So you don't do
if we accept it. No. I mean, we have to say thank you very much. Do send the CVs through. Very kind of you to offer up your nationals for that job. But we will carry on delivering that principled, needs-based approach. But so this is the reality. The American, a lot of people talk about the American administration now. A sense of aid conditionality isn't something new. We remember that period, I suppose the sort of 2000s in particular, where we were trying to move the world towards 0.7% and towards aid with no ties, no conditionality. In this more transactional moment, the money is going down, overstretched, under-resourced, literally under attack, and every time a donor cuts, they seem to put more conditionality on how we spend their money. I mean,
the cuts on American aid have presumably been the deepest and the most, the ones that you feel the most.
We do.
What proportion of international aid was America providing?
So they're about 40 to 45% before the cuts. So you're talking about an enormous chunk of money there. That was saving hundreds of millions, did save hundreds of millions of lives over decades. So they were by far the biggest player in the sector.
And how much of it has gone?
Oh, I mean, almost half of that has gone, and that's probably an optimistic scenario. The sector has been historically so chaotic in terms of the way that donors and member states operate that no one knows for sure what the US aid budget was. But, you could say it's probably 15, 16, 17 billion. And we managed to secure an agreement for 2 billion at the end of December.
They were the most significant donors in Sudan, weren't they?
And they still are.
And they still are.
Yeah, even with the aid cuts,
right.
It actually shows how far ahead they were. Even with the aid cuts, the Americans were our biggest donor in Sudan last year, and I'm pretty certain they'll be our biggest donor in Sudan this year. They've just given us 200 million for our country fund in Sudan, which we're spending at the moment.
Sudan is the war that has been pushed out of the way by everything that's happening in the Middle East. Can you contextualize it for us in terms of the need, the numbers of people dying, the numbers of people reliant on food aid?
Yeah, it's massive. So you've got 34 million people in need right now, 9 million internally displaced, 4.5 million displaced into neighbors. So you've got that ripple effect of the conflict going through South Sudan, through Chad, for example. And, I've been in Sudan twice in the last year, as well as into South Sudan. I had a week in Darfur a month or two ago. And the needs are immense. You've got famine coming back in, but very, very high levels of starvation. You've got shifting battle lines. And a lot of what we do is across those lines, I went through 30, 40 checkpoints to get close to Al-Fasher, the epicenter of that fighting. You've got the massive weaponization of sexual violence against women and girls. So you're meeting people all the time who've been gang raped, who've escaped with other people's children through and across these lines of child soldiers. It's utterly, utterly devastating. It's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now.
And yet, it's only getting worse, isn't it?
It is only getting worse. And, I was very struck, briefing the Security Council last week by this UNICEF stat that number of kids killed in the first quarter has gone up 50% this year on last year. Because I think for all of us, we think, these long-running crises, Sudan is 3 years now, they're just somehow rumbling along. But there is a trajectory to this, and it's worse. And of course, you're right to call Sudan a neglected crisis, but it's less neglected and less underfunded than South Sudan, Central African Republic, Somalia, where I'll go next week. All of those are completely off the radar of the international community.
Where the need is what? Is people reliant on food aid mostly?
Massive needs. So we reckon, globally, it's over 320 million people need help right now. It's a staggering, overwhelming number. And we've identified, and it's not a popular move within the sector, but we've said we can save 87 million lives globally this year. And to do that through this hyper-prioritise plan, all the efficiency we're bringing in, taking out all the duplication and bureaucracy, we're asking for $23 billion, which is nothing compared to what the sector used to absorb each year, but is only 1%, actually less than 1%, of what the world will spend on guns and arms defense security this year, even before the recklessness of March.
Yes, I mean, that's a couple of weeks of the Iran war,
Yeah.
is what you're saying.
You're right. It's a fortnight of the Iran war.
When you say 87 million lives you can save, just explain that. Are you saying 87 million people are going to die?
If we don't do that,
that are preventable deaths this year?
Yeah, that will be 87 million people.
I mean, that's a staggering number.
If we don't get that 23 billion, and I reckon after a quarter of the year, we're a quarter of the way to raising the money. So we're broadly on track to raise that. It's not an overambitious stretch goal, given what the world spends money on elsewhere. But no, if we got 0 as opposed to 23 billion, then 87 million people would not be reached with life-saving aid. And there are 87 million people who are in what we call severity 4 and 5, the most urgent, the most life-threatening
they are severely
situations.
At risk.
But the other side of the coin, Krishnan, is that in January, we know, because we're tracking this much more carefully now as part of this plan. I mean, listen, in January, we saved 7 million lives. That should be leading the news. I mean, I should be starting the interview telling you what an amazing month we had.
What do you mean by that? When you say we saved 7 million lives?
So we reached 7 million people with life-saving support who are in severity 4 and 5. So are in the most life-threatening situations. Now, would every single one have died? I mean, then we're getting into, it's impossible to quantify whether some would have found a way to survive and so on. But this is not just us turning up in places which are, just about muddling along and saying, let's dish out some pita bread. This is us going at the hardest to reach places, to reach people who are starving, who are needing vaccination, who are needing that life-saving support.
So when you say the world is less generous, how do you think you can turn that around?
So hard. And what you'd hope is, come on, talk to you, podcasts, meet, get into interviews, get in front of people and make the ethical case, the moral case for generosity and solidarity. I believe we have these two competing instincts. Darwin wasn't just survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest is also that we work together for resource. And I think if someone was dying on the floor in front of us now, then I wouldn't be finishing my cup of tea. I'd be sharing whatever I have with them. But somehow people have got overwhelmed by the numbers. There's been a sense it's all just too big. So you hope there's that case for human solidarity. And if governments won't listen, then we have to win that argument with the public. But then alongside that, there's a more technocratic case, which is that we have a plan. We can do this. We can save 87 million lives this year. And let me show you how I'll do that and where I'll do it. And, the mixture between food, water, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. And then I hope there's a transactional argument. It's not one I want to make. It's not one I like making, but you can't put a tariff on a pandemic. You can't build the wall that will keep out the climate crisis. So unless you deal with these problems at source, and by the way, it's cheaper to back us to do that than it is to deal with the consequences, then you will face much, much greater costs and pain further down the track.
Do you think you need to make a bigger argument around migration? Given that is such a driver of Western politics at the moment, that if you sort those things, you will not have another wave of refugees or asylum seekers.
I think politically, and I hear this in Europe in particular, that's an argument that might resonate more with politicians. I was just in Berlin last week, and it was interesting talking to parliamentarians there, and they were saying, don't rely on us, don't rely on our generosity. Our country has done so much for waves of Syrian, Afghan, Ukrainian refugees. Make the case on the basis that there won't be further waves of migration. But look, I'm the UN Humanitarian chief. I don't want to be out there making an argument on the basis of, more selfish interests. If others want to make that argument, then fair enough. I hope that people will respond to the ethical, moral case for doing this. And by the way, whatever happens, 1 degree more centigrade rise on the world and 1 billion people will move from places that we have lived as humans for millennia. And they're coming in this direction. So migration is a factor. It's a fact. And we were all migrants once and we'll all be migrants again. Today's empires are tomorrow's refugees. And tomorrow's peace processes will often be between host communities and migrant communities. So we're going to have to change the whole way we think about this and work on issues of migration. And if we allow ourselves to go down that route of blaming everything on migrants, and looking to get our numbers down, there's no way back.
I mean, the other bit of sort of rhetoric internationally that has really taken off again in the last few years is anti-UN rhetoric, and saying it's a useless organisation.
You can be rude. You can be rude. It's all right.
It's
can quote them.
Corrupt. All on the wrong side of various conflicts. The Israelis accuse UN workers of being terrorists
and anti-Semitic.
Yes,
there is that attack.
How seriously has the UN taken the demand for reform?
Yeah.
And how much further does it need to go?
So firstly, on the critique, every time you hear someone attacking the UN, and I hear obviously all those accusations, ask yourself what they're gaining by weakening us, by weakening that scaffolding for global coexistence, by weakening the restraint on these sort of strong man, kind of macho powers in this very transactional moment. Secondly, a lot of what we're criticized for are actually problems that need to be solved by the member states themselves. If the Security Council wants us to do more peacekeeping, it's the Security Council that can come together, give us that mandate, give us the support. If it wants us to save more lives, it can back us. It can back my campaign to save 87 million lives. But that's all true, but we shouldn't be let off the hook. We have to be energetically reforming with much more ambition and confidence. We're doing that through this humanitarian reset that I've described, where we're taking the layers out, we're hyper-prioritizing, we're moving power away from people like me and down towards the people we serve, to local level, while defending the rule of law and our values and principles. Across the UN, the Secretary General, Guterres, in his last year, is doing more energetic reform than any SG before in their final year. It's not easy with the political capital that you have at that stage. But this morning, my first call, and God knows what time it was in New York, that's the SG saying, get on with this. I want to see results. Come on, I want to see real outcomes. So he's all over that too. But there's a moment now. We've got the election of a new Secretary General in September. They'll start at the beginning of the year. There's a moment there for reform, because someone comes in afresh. You can argue with the member states who actually have the restraint on reform. And I think we should go big. I think we should be renewing, we should be regrouping around the coalitions that need us. We should be doing much more future-proofing of the world for a world of AI. Is the algorithm going to be humanitarian? I doubt it at this moment. The world of climate crisis. And so there is that moment. And so I think whoever comes in as Secretary General, whoever she is, will come in with a mandate to go big on reform. And they should be backed by member states.
I mean, just finally, you're an international diplomat now, but you were, of course, a British diplomat and a British advisor in Downing Street, just as the Foreign Office is in perhaps its biggest crisis of modern times. Do you agree with the assessment of how bad the crisis is in terms of the relationship between the Foreign Office and Number 10?
Well, look, the UN doesn't have a position on what's going on in the UK, and I have to make that...
Are you able to speak personally?
I have to make that caveat very clear, because I spoke personally this morning and immediately got a lot of feedback that my views on the UK political situation were not part of my job, nor that welcome at the moment. So what I would say is, as you said, I've been a British diplomat for a long time. I want British diplomacy to be effective in the world, values-driven. I don't think it's in Britain's interest to erect this sort of permanent circular firing squad, which, looking in from outside, is often the case. Certainly has been the case over the last decade or so. We need the UK out there helping us to resolve these crises, to end some wars, to be a more generous humanitarian donor than it's proving to be an energetic member of the Security Council and working on UN reform. And look, I'm watching this current political drama. I know most of the characters.
Ollie Robbins is a friend of
pretty
yours.
Well. Yeah, I've known Ollie for a long time, and I've worked with him for many decades. He's a guy of just immense integrity. He has this, public service ethos, which many people do, but I think it's at his core. In Ollie's case, he's really driven by public service.
So he's a big loss.
He's a terrific loss. Absolutely. He was doing a big job. He was leading actually quite an ambitious reform of the Foreign Office. And I'm sad. I'm sad for him. that he's lost a job that was actually also a vocation. And I really hope that the UK can get back to looking outwards again. And it can sometimes feel a bit introverted at the moment.
I mean, I take what you're saying about what you can and can't say. So if you can't say anything, you can't say anything. But you've worked in Number 10 as well. When you look at a prime minister blaming officials, does a bad workman blame his tools?
You are no chance, Krishnan. I'm not. Thank you for the question, but no, the United Nations does not have a view on whether the Prime Minister is a bad workman blaming his tools. A nice try. And I reckon you could. I mean, you're the best interviewer on the planet. You're gonna get it out of me, but we won't have time for you to put me on the rack and make me say something I'm not supposed to say.
All right. Well, I won't drag it out of you. Tom Fletcher, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Krishnan.
That's the Fourcast. Until next time. Bye bye.